Welcome back to Daily Gossip. Usually, when we sit down together, we are diving into the latest scandals rocking the entertainment world, the corporate shakeups that have Wall Street buzzing, or the cultural moments that have everyone talking around the proverbial water cooler. But today, we are taking a hard left turn. Grab your coffee or maybe something stronger, because the gossip we are unpacking today isn't and oppos tea about pop stars or tech billionaires. It is about the absolute highest stakes game on the planet. It is about power, betrayal, desperation, and a massive, quiet shift in global supremacy that is happening right under our noses. What I am about to share with you is the kind of story that mainstream cable news in Washington, London, and Paris is actively trying to sanitize. They are giving you the bedtime story version of global events. But here on Daily Gossip, we don and oppos do bedtime stories. We deal in reality, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Right now, as we speak, what may be the most stunning political reversal of the entire decade is unfolding in the shadows of the Middle East. The leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the very same men who stood shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump just weeks ago, beaming for the cameras and talking tough, have quietly, desperately sent high-level delegations rushing toward Tehran. And let me be crystal clear about why they are going. They are not going to negotiate from a position of strength. They are not going to broker a grand peace deal to save the world. They are going to beg. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Donald Trump is panicking. While the American president has been busy posting victory messages on social media about his so-called naval blockade of Iran, boasting about American dominance and economic pressure, something happened that no Pentagon general and certainly no Western news outlet wants you to fully understand. The blockade didn't and oppos just fail. It didn't and oppos just stumble or fall short of its goals. It triggered the exact opposite of what it was designed to do. It drove America and oppos' own most loyal, well-funded Gulf allies straight into the arms of the nation they have spent decades trying to destroy, Iran. So here is the multi-trillion-dollar question that no one in the Beltway dares to ask out loud. Did Donald Trump just accidentally hand Iran the biggest geopolitical win of the 21st century? Stay with me, because what is unfolding right now in the murky waters of the Persian Gulf is not just a military story about ships and missiles. It is a deeply human story about hubris. It is a story about the slow, painful, and very public collapse of an American strategy that was fundamentally broken before the ink on the orders was even dry. And more importantly, for every single one of you listening right now in your cars commuting to work, or sitting in your kitchens in Ohio or London or Berlin, this is a story about your wallet, your future, and the world your children are going to inherit. Let us start by stripping away the polished press briefings and looking at what actually happened at the Strait of Hormuz. If you have only been absorbing the carefully curated narratives from Western cable news networks, you have been handed a version of reality so disconnected from the truth it borders on fiction. When the naval blockade of Iran was announced, the message from Washington was intoxicatingly simple. The United States Navy, the most formidable maritime force ever assembled in human history, was going to draw a line in the water. They were going to choke off Iran and oppos' oil exports, drain its economy dry, and force Tehran to crawl to the negotiating table within a matter of weeks. The talking points were all about how clean, surgical, and decisive this operation would be. That was the master plan. And honestly, on paper, if you sit in an air-conditioned think tank in Washington and completely ignore geography, history, basic economics, and the fundamental concept of how Iran actually operates as a nation-state, it might have sounded almost logical. Except none of it worked. The reality hit the fan almost immediately. Within the first 48 hours of the blockade going live, the satellite imagery and real-time ship tracking data began to tell a completely different, deeply embarrassing story. The Iranian oil terminals did not go dark. The massive Iranian tankers did not stop loading their crude. What independent maritime analysts, the people who actually watched the raw data instead of reading political talking points, actually saw looked less like a military blockade and more like rush-hour traffic in a major metropolis. Hundreds of enormous vessels were moving oil out of Iranian ports with barely a pause. Millions of barrels of Iranian crude kept flowing east, sailing straight past the American warships, heading inexorably toward China. And what did the United States Navy do? With its multi-billion-dollar carrier strike groups, its state-of-the-art destroyer patrols, and its overwhelming firepower, the Navy watched. They watched and they did absolutely nothing. Why? Because doing something, actually firing a warning shot across the bow of a Chinese-linked supertanker, or boarding a vessel flying the flag of a major sovereign nation, would trigger a chain reaction of consequences that absolutely nobody in Washington was prepared to face. You cannot call that a blockade. Let an oppose. Be honest with ourselves. That is a taxpayer-funded photo opportunity featuring very expensive warships. This is exactly where the narrative shifts from being a mere embarrassment for the American political establishment to something genuinely, existentially alarming for every single Gulf state that signed up to be a passenger on this reckless adventure. If you have been following the chess match in this region for a while, you already know the profound truth that military planners often overlook. Iran and Oppo's real weapon of mass destruction is not its navy, which is relatively small. It is not even its arsenal of ballistic missiles, though those are certainly a threat. Iran and Oppo's ultimate unbeatable weapon is its geography. And geography, unlike political will or banking systems, cannot be sanctioned. You cannot pass a UN resolution to move a mountain range or widen a strait. Before we dive deeper into the sheer panic gripping the leaders of the Gulf right now, because this is the juicy, behind-the-scenes reality that the mainstream media is completely burying to protect their access to power, I need to take a quick pause. If this kind of unfiltered, deep-dive reporting matters to you, if you are tired of being treated like a child by the evening news and want to understand the real forces shaping your world, I need you to subscribe to the channel right now. We do not answer to massive media conglomerates or defense contractors. We answer entirely to you, our listeners. Hitting that subscribe button, leaving a comment, or even just sharing this episode with a friend who needs to hear it is how we beat the algorithms that try to suppress this kind of analysis. Your support is what keeps the daily gossip independent, raw, and real. So please, take a second to subscribe, and let's get back to the unraveling of the Middle East. Let us talk about those Gulf leaders rushing toward Tehran, and why this frantic scramble represents the single biggest, most catastrophic foreign policy failure in the entire history of the Gulf Cooperation Council. For months, even years, the leadership in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates positioned themselves as the absolute backbone of the American maximum pressure strategy against Iran. They were all in. They allowed their sovereign airspace to be utilized by foreign jets. They hosted vital American military assets and sprawling bases. They publicly and enthusiastically cheered every single new round of economic sanctions rolled out by the U.S. Treasury. They truly, deeply believed they were backing the winning horse. They bought into the promise that America would deliver a swift, decisive, crushing blow that would permanently neutralize Iran and Oppo's influence and secure their own dominance in the region for a generation. Instead of a decisive victory, what they got was a terrifying standoff at the Strait of Hormuz that their own fragile, deeply interconnected economies absolutely cannot survive. Here is the harsh, unforgiving geographic reality that the highly paid, Western-educated advisors in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi apparently failed to articulate to their bosses. The Gulf Arab states, despite their glittering skylines and massive sovereign wealth funds, are not self-sufficient nations. They do not have vast, fertile heartlands capable of domestic food production. They do not have deep, secure land corridors to friendly neighbors. Yes, they are incredibly wealthy. They possess unimaginable financial resources, but that wealth is a house of cards that depends entirely on two continuous, uninterrupted actions: oil flowing out to the world, and everything else: food, medicine, luxury goods, construction materials, flowing in. And both of those existential lifelines require the sea lanes to remain wide open and perfectly safe. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a body of water. It is the central artery of the global economy, handling close to 20% of the world and Oppo's seaborne oil every single day. The very second that Strait transitions from a commercial waterway into a live, unpredictable conflict zone, the math changes drastically. Every single barrel of oil attempting to pass through becomes an insurance disaster. We are talking about shipping premiums skyrocketing overnight, creating a cost catastrophe that ripples outward to every corner of the globe. But more locally, it becomes a political liability that no shiny, ultramodern port in the Gulf can absorb quietly. The simple truth is that the Gulf states are not innocent bystanders watching a fight between America and Iran. Because of their geography and their economic models, they are the primary victims of any disruption. But the story gets even darker for them because there is a second choke point. This is the one receiving almost zero attention on your evening news broadcasts, but it is the one keeping the royals awake at night. I am talking about the Bab al-Mandab Strait, historically known as the Gate of Tears. This incredibly narrow, treacherous waterway sits between Yemen and Djibouti. It serves as the Gulf states and Oppo's only viable western exit. It is the mandatory route their oil takes toward the lucrative markets of Europe. It is the vital corridor through which their massive imports of food, agricultural fertilizer, and consumer goods arrive. Right now, as we navigate this crisis, the armed forces in Yemen effectively control the threat environment around every single commercial ship that dares to attempt passage through the Bab al-Mandab. To the leadership in Saudi Arabia, the Yemeni front is not some minor footnote or localized border skirmish. It is a loaded gun pointed directly at their jugular vein. The moment the American blockade escalated tensions at Hormuz, the Yemeni allied forces made their strategic position chillingly clear. They are fully prepared, willing, and able to activate the Bab al-Mandab and shut it down. And this is not an empty bluff. We know they are not bluffing because they have literally done it before. During the recent Gaza conflicts, they successfully choked off Israeli-linked shipping for months, causing massive logistical nightmares. They have the asymmetric military capability, they certainly have the ideological motivation, and right now they are just sitting back, watching the clock, waiting for the order from Tehran. This dual-threat scenario is exactly why the mood inside the gilded palaces of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi right now is decidedly not defiant. They are not projecting the quiet confidence of untouchable monarchs. The mood is somewhere hovering between grim resignation and outright existential terror. If you dig into the reports of the frantic backchannel communications currently flying between the capitals of the Gulf and the White House, you will find senior officials using language that would never, ever make it into a sanitized public press release. We are talking about intercepted communications and leaked memos detailing desperate conversations about the impending collapse of food security. They are wargaming industrial paralysis. They are asking terrifying questions about what happens to the social fabric and political stability of their nations when the supermarket shelves go completely empty in ultra-modern, luxury-obsessed cities like Jeddah and Dubai. I want you to really pause and think about that for a moment. These are not impoverished, developing nations struggling with systemic drought. These are some of the wealthiest, most ostentatious cities on the face of the earth. These are places that build indoor ski slopes in the desert and import gold leaf steaks. And right now, their leaders are locked in panic rooms having deadly serious conversations about baseline food security. That singular fact tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how severely this American blockade miscalculation has fractured the region and Oppo's entire sense of safety and permanence. These nations import the vast, overwhelming majority of everything they consume to survive. Their entire model relies on perfectly timed, and quote, just-in-time, and quote, global supply chains that must pass through either Hormuz or Bab al-Mandab every single day. With both of these vital straits now under the effective, unyielding leverage of Iran, Hormuz through sheer geographical proximity, and Bab al-Mandab through their steadfast Yemeni alliance, the Gulf states are standing on the edge of an economic cliff, staring down into an abyss with no visible bottom. And here is the brutal, almost cinematic twist of irony that makes this entire geopolitical tragedy almost poetic, if it weren't and Oppo's so deeply devastating for the millions of people caught in the middle. The Gulf states helped build this exact trap for themselves. They were the architects of their own nightmare. They heavily lobbied for and supported the aggressive policy. They willingly hosted the vast military infrastructure required to execute it. They were enthusiastic, cheering passengers on this runaway train. And now, the train has crashed, and they find themselves locked inside a burning trap, desperately looking for a key that only Tehran possesses. Unsurprisingly, Iran is not in the business of handing out keys for free, especially not to neighbors who recently plotted their ruin. Tehran and Oppo's formal diplomatic response to the desperate, sweating delegations arriving from the Gulf has been incredibly precise, coldly calculated, and completely uncompromising. The message delivered to the Saudis and Emiratis is simple. Any conversation about easing regional tensions, any plea to open the shipping lanes, begins and ends with accountability. The nations that eagerly provided their sovereign airspace, their logistical support, and their military facilities to facilitate economic and potential military strikes on Iranian infrastructure are not going to receive a magical clean slate just because they are suddenly uncomfortable with the consequences of their actions. The Iranian stance is resolute. You helped start this massive fire, you provided the gasoline, and now you are going to pay a very steep price to help put it out. That message has landed in the opulent capitals of the Gulf like a brick thrown through a stained glass window. The end quote. Reconstruction demands and quote, currently being whispered about in these back-channel meetings, represent nothing short of a complete, humiliating reversal of the regional power dynamic. This is a dynamic that the Gulf states have spent decades, and literally billions upon billions of dollars trying to establish and cement. They funded proxy armies across the Middle East. They cultivated deep, expensive ties for American military protection, buying up state-of-the-art weaponry like it was going out of style. They built their entire foreign policy identity around the core idea that Iran could be permanently contained, economically starved, and eventually broken. Yet, in the span of just a few catastrophic weeks, driven by a poorly conceived blockade, that entire decades-long strategic framework has completely crumbled into dust. Now, let me pivot for a moment and be incredibly direct with you, because this is where the story expands far beyond the deserts of the Middle East and lands right on your doorstep. If you are an adult living, working, and paying taxes in North America or Europe, you might be thinking, and quote, this is fascinating gossip, but how does this affect my daily life? And quote, well, let an oppos talk about the colossal miscalculation happening in Washington. This is the part of the saga that truly stretches the limits of what passes for strategic intelligence in our political capitals. Consider the domestic reality that the American leadership is currently operating within. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency backup meant to cushion the country from disaster, is currently sitting at historically, dangerously low levels. American consumers, and indeed consumers all across Europe, are already feeling the crushing, daily pressure of elevated fuel costs. Inflation, despite what the rosy official press releases claim, has absolutely not been fully tamed. The cost of living is eating away at the middle class. These are the precarious, highly volatile domestic conditions under which the administration is and knowing all of this, knowing the vulnerabilities stacked against them at home, they made the active, conscious choice to announce a hostile blockade on a waterway that carries a fifth of the world in Oppo's seaborne energy supply. Anyone with a basic understanding of supply and demand could tell you that the only mathematically guaranteed outcome of threatening the Strait of Hormuz was that global oil prices were going to spike aggressively. And who pays that price? Not Iran. Iran is happily selling millions of barrels of its oil to China. And crucially, they are conducting these massive transactions in the Chinese yuan, utilizing a parallel financial architecture that completely bypasses American banks, American regulations, and American sanctions. So, who actually pays for this aggressive foreign policy? You do. The American and European consumers do. You are the ones standing at the gas station this summer, watching the numbers spin out of control. You are the ones who will feel the impact of every single dollar of this failed policy draining from your wallets, your grocery budgets, and your retirement accounts, while the politicians point fingers and refuse to take the blame. The Iranian parliament speaker recently addressed this reality publicly, and he did it without a shred of diplomatic softening or polite rhetoric. He essentially looked directly at the camera and said that Western consumers should enjoy today and Oppo's high gas prices because they are about to get a very painful, very expensive education in what the strategy of, in quote, maximum pressure, in quote, actually costs when it backfires. That statement wasn't Oppo's just a petty taunt from a weak, cornered nation. It was a cold, hard statement of fact from a government that knows it holds the ultimate geographic leverage over the most critical, irreplaceable energy corridor on the planet. And while all of this chaos, panic, and economic self-destruction is happening in the West and the Gulf, we have to talk about the dragon in the room. China is watching this entire geopolitical meltdown with something approaching calm, quiet satisfaction. Beijing is not panicking. Beijing is calculating. For years, China has been strategically laying the groundwork for this exact moment. They have secured massive, long-standing energy agreements with Iran. They have been purchasing heavily discounted Iranian crude oil for years, stockpiling reserves. Most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, China has methodically built an alternative, parallel global financial system that the long arm of the U.S. Treasury simply cannot reach or regulate. When Washington arrogantly announced the Hormuz blockade, expecting the world to fall in line, China's defense establishment responded immediately. They didn't oppose to use flowery diplomatic packaging or vague statements of concern. Their message to the Pentagon was terrifyingly blunt. Do not interfere with our sovereign ships. Do not attempt to escalate this situation into a conflict that you do not have the stomach or the stamina to finish. And you know what happened? The United States blinked. Let that sink in. The global superpower blinked. Now, let's be fair. This wasn't oppose. Because the American Navy lacks the firepower to destroy a tanker. Anyone who understands modern military hardware knows that the U.S. Navy exists in a devastating category of its own. In a pure shooting war, their capability is unmatched. The blink happened because the leadership in the United States suddenly realized they simply do not have the political unity, the domestic support, or the economic resilience to follow through on a direct, kinetic confrontation with China over a shipment of Iranian oil. A live-fire incident in the Strait of Hormuz involving a Chinese-flagged vessel wouldn't oppose just be a localized military skirmish. It would be an instantaneous, catastrophic financial earthquake. It would be an event felt in every single stock market, every commodities exchange, and every bond market on the planet before the sun even came up the next morning. It would trigger a global recession or worse, a depression in a matter of days. And the politicians in Washington, facing their own angry voters and fragile economies, stared into that abyss and quietly backed away. This brings us to the final, most profound, and deeply honest truth about this entire crisis. The truth that is reshaping the world while we are all distracted by partisan bickering. America is not losing the standoff in the Strait of Hormuz because of Iran and oppose's military strength. Iran is not overpowering the U.S. Navy. America is losing the standoff because the fundamental architecture of global finance and energy has been quietly, steadily shifting beneath its feet for the last decade. And Washington, blinded by its own historical supremacy, is only just now waking up to the terrifying reality that the ground it confidently assumed it owned has already changed hands. For half a century, the foundation of Western economic dominance has been the petrodollar. This was the brilliant post-World War II arrangement that cemented the American dollar as the undisputed global reserve currency by mandating that all international oil sales be conducted exclusively in U.S. dollars. It gave America unparalleled leverage over the global economy. But today, right now, that system is facing its most serious existential challenge since it was constructed in the 1970s. The walls are coming down. China and Iran are openly trading vast quantities of energy outside the dollar. Russia and India are completing massive infrastructure and energy deals using their own currencies. The BRICS nations are moving quietly, steadily, and purposefully to decouple from the Western financial system. They are moving with the immense financial backing of the world and oppose's second-largest economy and the terrifying patience of a civilization that plans in terms of decades and centuries, rather than reacting to 4-year election cycles. The naval blockade of Iran was explicitly designed by the administration to be a grand, theatrical showcase of American dominance. It was meant to remind the world who is in charge. But what it actually showcased, brilliantly and tragically for the West, is the precise, undeniable outline of exactly where American power ends and where the new multipolar world begins. And that boundary line is not theoretical. It is drawn quite literally, geographically, across the sparkling surface of the Persian Gulf. So, where does the world go from here? The situation on the ground is moving at breakneck speed. The Gulf states remain in absolute diplomatic overdrive, their leaders sweating under their robes. Their delegations, continually heading toward Tehran, carry a heavy, unspoken message beneath whatever formal, diplomatic language they are feeding to the press. The message is simple: we surrender the strategy, we want a way out of this nightmare. But Iran, holding all the geographical and economic cards, is in absolutely no rush to offer a painless exit. They are going to make it hurt. Every single day this crisis drags on, Tehran and Oppos. Leverage only grows stronger, and the Gulf and Oppos. Deep economic vulnerabilities become more exposed and critical. The longer the Bab al-Mandab Strait remains a volatile potential flashpoint, the more immense pressure falls on the shoulders of the leaders in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi to make humiliating, unprecedented concessions. Concessions they never in their wildest dreams imagined they would have to sit across a table and discuss with their sworn enemies. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the architect of this policy is trapped in a political and strategic nightmare of his own making, wedged firmly between two terrible options. The administration cannot boldly escalate against China without instantly triggering a global financial crisis that would make the domestic inflation problems look like a mild inconvenience by comparison. It would be political suicide. But conversely, they cannot simply back down and recall the ships without officially confirming to the entire world what Iran, China, and the rest of the watching globe have already declared loudly. That this blockade was nothing more than the most expensive, most embarrassing, and most poorly calculated bluff in the history of modern American foreign policy. The Gulf states, who swaggered into this chapter fully believing they had the world in Oppos' undisputed, most powerful military machine standing firmly behind them as an impenetrable shield, are now discovering a very ancient, very painful truth. It is a lesson that every empire and every nation in this volatile region eventually learns the hard way, often at the cost of their own ruin. And that lesson is this: military hardware is impressive and financial wealth is comfortable, but geography is the ultimate undefeated superpower. And in the complex, treacherous chessboard of the Persian Gulf, Iran has the geography. It has always had the geography. And now, the entire world knows that they know exactly how to use it to bring their enemies to their knees. The next move in this high-stakes game belongs entirely to Tehran. And trust me, looking at the board, Tehran is in absolutely no hurry to make it. They are letting the West sweat. This brings me to the end of today and Oppos' deep dive, but the conversation is far from over. I want to turn this over to you because the daily gossip community is made up of some of the sharpest, most critical thinkers out there. I want to ask you something directly, and I genuinely want to read your detailed answers in the comments section below. Let an Oppos' get a real debate going. Do you believe that the extraordinarily wealthy Gulf states just made a historic, potentially fatal mistake by blindly backing the American maximum pressure strategy? Have they sealed their own economic doom? Or do you think there is still a hidden path forward? Is there a scenario where this immense American pressure eventually cracks the Iranian resolve, and those Gulf leaders currently rushing toward Tehran somehow manage to come home with a victory, or at least their dignity intact? Tell me exactly what you think. Do not hold back, because I promise you, this story is nowhere near finished. The geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting as we speak, and the shockwaves are going to hit all of us. Neither is this channel and Oppos' coverage of every single move that comes next. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, if you want to know what the politicians are whispering behind closed doors while they lie to you on television, you need to be part of this community. Hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video to help us defeat the algorithm, share it with someone who needs a wake-up call, and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me today, for seeking out the truth.